So, say you've spent all this time learning how to play the Barry Harris scales in drop 2 chords. Okay, so this kind of thing, right? You know, so you've got all this, you can play them on different strings. I suppose one question a lot of people seem to ask is, what do I do with this? Okay, and I just want to take you through some of the basic applications in a practical way that I found useful. I'm not perhaps the person who's gone into the deepest way into the Barry Harris scales, but you can look up some other YouTubers for that. But I just wanted to share with you just how I've used them, and I've probably been using them now for about 15 years in various ways. So here are some practical applications. The very first is simply to harmonize melodies, okay? And that's kind of obvious when you think about it. The roots of the Barry Harris scales are in big band arranging. So, for instance, block chords, which come from the ways that sax players would harmonize their melodies in big band sax sections, right? So George Shearing was quite well known for taking this onto the piano, and on the guitar we have Wes Montgomery, of course, as well as people like Bill Evans was still using variants of drop 2 harmonization, for instance, in his solos. So it's this kind of part of the vocabulary, basic vocabulary of jazz, these block chords. Now what Barry does with the diminished scales that he's kind of now known for goes beyond simply block chords, but that's not to say that this isn't a really useful thing that everybody should learn. So I'm just going to take a simple standard. It's going to be Embraceable U. So Embraceable U has the chords G6, and then B flat diminished 7th, and then A minor D7, and then goes to A minor 7th, and then C minor 6th, right? So the only chords which perhaps we might need to do a little bit of thinking about in order to apply Barry Harris's stuff are the minor 7ths. The A minor 7th converts into C major 6th. That's the way Barry Harris would see it. So when we're harmonizing Embraceable U in a very simple way, we can just use the drop 2 scales to take this melody over the G. It goes like this. Yeah, okay. And over the B flat diminished, we just use all diminished chords. It's called the diminished scale, which I think normal people just call the diminished. That works great. And then there's only one note from over that chord, and then right, and we can carry on over the A minor 6th. We use the C6. A minor 7th. We use the C6. Sorry, and then yeah, so on, right? So that's pretty simple and pretty effective, and you can obviously also improvise chord solos a la Wes Montgomery that way, very simply. Now one thing I find with this is that sometimes it's really nice to do something called borrowing. So when we borrow in Barry Harris's system, or whatever it is, when we borrow a note, we take the usual chord that we would have. So for instance, a G6, right? And we actually just borrow the upper note, for instance, and then it becomes this chord. Or we could borrow the lower note, which is this one, this one, yeah, and so on. So we can actually enrich the harmony a bit. So the way that I found I have to end up using it in my music is, for instance, let's take Autumn in New York. There's a melody that goes like this. Okay, so let's take that first chord, that's a G minor 7th, so B flat 6th. But if I just play that note, ba, 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 which is the A, I would normally play it in terms of like harmonizing it with a drop 2 diminished 7th, like that. But if I do that and I borrow the note from the B flat 6 stroke G minor 7 into that, it sounds really beautiful. Plain sailing from there, right? So the use of borrowings can be really useful as well. For instance, if we use it in, I don't necessarily think it would sound so good in Embraceable U. I don't like that as much as the other thing that we did, but it has that it gives you a bit more flexibility in how you approach your melodic harmonizations. Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, I don't think it's necessary to track absolutely every chord when you're doing this. So for instance, if I'm playing, I Got Rhythm, for instance, rhythm changes tune, I would probably just choose B flat 6 diminished just to make life easy. So for instance, if I was just doing harmonization of that melody, and then that works very nicely. And then maybe, if I wanted a bit of variety, I might choose to use perhaps E flat 6. Like that. Maybe go into a dominant there, right? So that can give you a little bit more flexibility, but on the whole, I think I found that keeping the chords very blocked in exactly the same way that you would if you were doing one of Barry's improvisation classes. So for instance, we view rhythm changes as being B flat for a bar, F7 for a bar, B flat for a bar, F7 for a bar. Then it allows the ornamentations that are present already in the Barry Harris diminished scales to be used. So it's kind of like you're stripping it down and then putting more complexity back on top, and I think that's a lot of what we do in jazz generally. So I've talked a little bit about borrowing. I mean, borrowing does massively expand the possibilities of the scale. And for instance, if we just going up and down the scale with a borrowed soprano note, which is probably the simplest way we can use borrowed notes, we basically end up playing things like this, and it sounds really nice, I think. We get slightly richer chords, and then what sounds really nice if you kind of do like a suspension pattern. So if you remember my Baroque video, I was talking about ways in which we can move chords, but then leave bits of chords behind. So there's an analogous thing in this system where we just go, yeah. Sorry, it's hard up there. I need my Telecaster, it's easier to do chords on. I reckon that's why Ed Bickett liked Telecaster so much. Yeah, and then... yeah, and that just kind of has a nice effect. It kind of evens everything out. If I'm using diminished chords, rather than go... do the whole sort of 1920s silent film effects, I like to borrow notes from the... in this case, the minor sixth scale, or from the minor sixth chord, should I say? And it sounds very cool. Was it that one? Sorry, I mucked up there. But this is a good way of kind of just making it a little bit less predictable sometimes. So a little borrowing goes a long way, and of course, you can use borrowings to construct quite interesting harmonies. For instance, if you want a major chord with a, for instance, this one. If we want to put the flat six in, we can. It sort of raises the possibilities of what you can do with an individual chord. So, things like major sevenths, for instance, if I play, G major seventh, that's understood to be a borrowed note there, the major seventh belonging to the diminished part of the scale. And we can sort of extend this greatly if we use not the, and this is something Barry Harris has demonstrated, but if you use not the one chord, so in the case of, Brace for You, instead of using G6, if we actually use the chord of fifth up, D6, you get beautiful major ninth type sounds. So just for using the sixth chord, so for instance, this kind of stuff, major ninth, right? None of these are sounds you would particularly associate with the Barry Harris approach, but they are something that Barry himself has demonstrated in class. But then you also have, of course, all these diminished chords as well, so you can end up playing things like this, which is beautiful. We take that to G6 or... So there's quite a few options there. People, I think it's an old-fashioned approach to harmony, but I think what you've got to remember is that everything that is present in the chord scale system is present in the Barry Harris sixth diminished system, but with extra options. So for instance, in the case of the altered chords. So if we play, like, you know, a D7 sharp 9 or something, then we can play the major 6th diminished over the top. But that also gives us sort of really nice diminished notes as well, like that one, for instance. So, and then gives us all these options. And if you look at the, as Howard Rees points out, if you look at the for instance, this is called the tritones minor, because with tritone substituting we put a minor. But you can think of it as just being, you know, the minor 6th diminished upper half step. So if you're looking at something like D7 with an E flat minor 6th diminished scale over the top, you've actually got the this chord, the 13 flat 9, which by the way is also found in the G6 diminished scale as well. So they're very flexible. There's some really great sounds hiding in there, and I definitely encourage you to find out. Okay, one big practical use I've always had of these scales is to play bass lines and sort of walk chords up and down. So for instance, if I'm playing a G minor vamp, I might play something like this. Right? Which sounds like a sort of somewhere between Freddie Green and a walking bass line. I love it. So we could just do two strums on each. Kind of more old school. Great for gypsy jazz. You know, little passing chord there as well. So I mean that's really useful for that. If you don't know any of these shapes, it's very simple. You just take the drop 2s on the top 4 strings, and because you're playing a guitar where the 2 strings, unless you're one of those weirdos who plays uniform fourths or something, you have these 2 strings tuned to unison, and then all you have to do is just pop that down an octave, and you've got the drop 3 shape. So for instance, in the case of a G minor 6th diminished, that would become this, and then this diminished would become this, then this would become this, then this would become this, and this thing here would become this, and so on, right? So you've already got a free hit there. And what I tend to do with these chords is I tend to reduce them down a bit further, so I get rid of the top 2 strings, so it means you get incomplete voicings. But that's fine, because those chords are very easy to finger, and they're easier to move, right? Which is kind of what I want them to be for this. And also I don't want too much B string when I'm sort of comping that kind of style anyway. I find it kind of gets in the way. So that's kind of the way I approach that. Now, I mean, obviously I can do things like, for instance, in rhythm changes, I can take the dominant diminished scale and go, you know, and so on, right? So I can take the I can take that scale and I can run it up and down as a bass line with like for 2 bars, and then just have a little passing chord into the next chord. So for D7, for instance, if I just take that one, and then we're going to what's this one? Mental blank. C7. And so on, right? So it's a really useful tool. The last thing I want to show you is the way in which you can really use the major 6th diminished scale as a source of soloing ideas. So you might already know this sort of thing where you've got, like, you know, minor 6th diminished, and you go, you know, up the arpeggios. You know, you could go up and down. Mix it up a bit and make it less predictable. That's all great. I mean, that basically sounds like Lester Young. Coleman Hawkins is actually the guy who Barry referenced in the lesson when I learnt that. In fact, I think it sounds even better if you use the actual drop 2 grips, so you don't have to do any of that, and you just take, you know, for instance, his minor 6th diminished. I mean, that sounds brilliant to me. I love it. You could do, you know, let's take Embraceable You, and then, you know, you can break up the melody. Sorry. You know, but I think there's like endless sort of musical ideas that come just from breaking up the chords. I mean, I've said this before, you know. it's just really cool. I love the sound of drop two chords being used in melody like that. It's such a natural thing to the guitar, and yet it's such an underused resource. Anyway, I hope that's just really touching the surface. If you watch channels like Isaac Raz and things I learned from Barry Harris, as I'm sure you already do, you're gonna see some stuff which I probably can't even do. But from a practical point of view, I found these things particularly useful about the major and minor and so on, sixth diminished scales. And hopefully, if you're a bit overwhelmed by everything and not sure where to start, maybe this will give you an idea as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope to see you soon.